what was the difference between a farm that implemented air filtration and ones that did not. And what the study showed was over a 50% reduction in disease break rates on filtered farms compared to non-filtered farms. So it was a really good study that showed air filtration does work, and implemented the right way, can be a good tool to use to help prevent disease.
Welcome to the Poultry Podcast Show, brought to you by Wisenetics. I'm Doug Corver, dedicated to bringing you the latest insights and discussions in the poultry industry. Get ready to expand your knowledge and stay ahead with today's episode. If you find today's episode interesting, please let us know by visiting our website at wisenetics.com. Well, here we are in between the fall and spring bird migration seasons, which allows us to pause and discuss avian flu transmission during the course of the migrations, and ways that poultry farmers can help to prevent the devastating impacts the illness can have on layer farms. Today on the program, we're joined by two guests. Kellen Harris is Director of Sales for J&D Manufacturing, a leading provider of low-maintenance poultry ventilation and environmental control solutions. Welcome to the program, Kellen.
Glad to be here.
And Rob Langenhorst, who is the Technical Sales Manager for AAF International, a leading global manufacturer of air filtration solutions for agriculture and other industries. Welcome, Rob.
Thanks for having me.
So, it's been a rough fall season for highly pathogenic avian influenza H5N1, wasn't it?
If you look back, particularly what has happened in 2024, HPAI, especially when you look at the H5N1 strain, was a major challenge for the U.S. poultry industry. And its impact was severe across multiple fronts, obviously. If you look at the widespread losses that happened in the United States alone, really the catalyst of where all this started was, if you look back, really starting in 2022, really. Since 2022, we have lost more than 168 million birds in the U.S. poultry sector alone. To put in perspective of how bad 2024 was, of that almost 170 million birds, 100 million of that was 2024 alone. So devastation, across the board amongst all of our poultry guys. And, that includes turkey, layers, broilers, our duck and quail productions. It's been a tough time, for our poultry producers. The other severe impacts that we saw in 2024 also, too, was our human health and cross-species risk as well. There are at least 52 human cases in the U.S. during 2024 alone who have worked or working in these poultry facilities or have, possibly even backyard birds. And most of these were linked to, due to infected poultry or even dairy cows, in dairy facilities as well. And that's where we're seeing these cross-species risk as well now. And, just last week, we just learned of the first case of a new strain, H5N5, in Washington State, where, this patient is in, critical conditions. So, we may be seeing a new mutation, here in the U.S. now that, we have to combat. And then, once you take in economic and industry impacts, the amount of losses, translates to real economic pain. On the consumers as us, buying egg products, but then also too, the integrators of the amount of time of, shutting down and the amount of money costs, it takes to, having to cull your entire, flocks, it's very, very costly, to our integrators. Yeah, that's really the challenges that we've been seeing, since 2024 and even going back to 2022.
Well, we've kind of alluded to, the spring and fall migrations. Can you talk a little bit about, what goes on in the spring and in the fall that makes these particularly challenging times?
Yeah, the biggest thing with the migration is, we know that waterfowl are some of the main carriers of HPAI as they move from, in the spring from the south up into Canada for their nesting areas, and then again in the fall as they migrate back south to their wintering grounds. And that's when we typically see a lot of these outbreaks start peaking or escalating during this migration. And typically we kind of see it as a pattern from north to south as those birds migrate. And obviously, again, the opposite happens in the spring, south to north. And it just poses a huge risk and an issue that, these are wild birds. We cannot control them. We can't control them stopping over our farms, our lagoons, our lakes. And so it gets really difficult to know exactly where that virus is at and how close it is coming to our facilities.
So this isn't just a U.S. issue, is it, Rob? Can you talk about the global impacts in other markets?
No, correct. It is a complete global virus issue. Europe this fall seeing just over 1,300 cases of HPAI in 34 countries. That's a 45% increase from 2024. We're also seeing it in Asia, Africa, pretty much every area across the global aspect of where anywhere that birds are migrating fall and springtime. So it's not just a U.S. problem, it is a global issue.
Every poultry farmer worries about avian influenza. American Air Filter, with advanced filter technology to help keep barns safe from airborne disease, is teaming with J&D Manufacturing's ventilation experts, giving you more than just clean airflow. You're getting peace of mind. Together, American Air Filter and J&D help provide stronger protection, cleaner air, and healthier flocks. When every bird counts, count on your team of experts at J&D and American Air Filter. Learn more at jdaaf.com.
Let's talk about what actually happens when avian influenza hits a layer farm. Can either one of you talk about the impacts of that, economic or otherwise?
Yeah, well, here in the U.S., when a poultry farm comes down with avian flu, whether, it's detected in one barn, say, for instance, you've got 10 houses on one farm, if one barn, tests positive, for avian flu, you are depopulating your entire farm. So typically what ends up happening, it's usually a long week process of, having to depopulate and, cull off all your flock. And then, there's a long process too of, once we cull the birds, now we have to take everything out of these houses. There's a long sitting period of now we have to disinfect. These farms usually have to sit for at least 2 to 3 months, without, a flock, to make sure that, the virus has been completely eradicated, from these facilities and has to go through several, test periods, to make sure it is completely gone. So then also too, a lot of impact also too depends on, okay, well, if your layer barn gets infected, it's one thing, but, did your pullet facility get infected as well? So what a lot of these integrators are experiencing is not only did my layers take a toll, but now I've lost my pullets and now I can't replenish and, restock my houses for probably another, 20, 24 weeks. So there's major economic impact on that, to the integrator of, just being able to get back into operation. And again, that affects the consumer market as well. We obviously seen, crazy high egg prices, egg shortages everywhere. So yeah, I mean, from my perspective, that's, the type of toll, that it takes, for the integrators, when they have to completely depopulate, and it's a challenge to even repopulate.
Yeah, and of course, farmers want to farm, and so that's a big hit to their way of life and psychologically and emotionally as well.
Correct. Yeah, and and even take the fact of the workers that are working at these facilities. So, if your farm is out for 2024 weeks and you're a employee working on this farm, well, now you're out of a job. The integrator may not be, They may not have another farm locally in the area, So what do you do with your employees as well? So that's a other type of economic impact that it takes, from the economy as well is, we got jobs to support. And due to HPI, some people are out of jobs, due to just, well, there's no birds on the farm, there's no work.
Rob, recently you wrote an article regarding a case study. Can you tell us more about that?
We work very closely with the University of Minnesota, doing a lot of filtration work in the swine industry. And so this study looked at a 16-year study on looking at the disease break rates on just a little over 400 sow farms across the country. And what it did was it looked at air-filtered farms compared to non-filtered farms. And what we wanted to see is what was the difference between a farm that implemented air filtration and ones that did not. And what the study showed was over a 50% reduction in disease break rates on filtered farms compared to non-filtered farms. So it was a really good study that showed air filtration does work, and implemented the right way can be a good tool to use to help prevent disease.
Well, that's maybe a good lead off for my next question. Talking about a proper ventilation system. Rob, the article and the study you talked about was in swine, but do we see this similar sort of thing in the poultry industry in layers, and keeping avian influenza out of the building?
Yeah, so filtration is a little bit newer on the poultry side aspect of things, but from a virus particle standpoint, very similar sizes. And so our filters will capture those viruses from an airborne transmission. So any sort of ventilation project, just like we see in swine, is really no different than in poultry. So it's a very easy application to adjust into those type of settings. It just takes some conversations with the integrators of exactly how they want to manage their ventilation for us to set up the right package to meet what their needs are.
Besides biosecurity, which we know is super important, ventilation, though, is also a foundation of keeping avian influenza out of these, poultry facilities. So when you think about, well, how does HPI enter a building? It's almost always through a combination of air movement, dust, wild bird contamination. It could even be a dairy farm that has spread manure out in the field. That manure could, have traces of HPAI, in the manure, and, could possibly be drifted through, wind, on a windy day that could possibly blow into your facility. So the first line of defense, I think we always think is biosecurity, but there's a huge piece that we're missing to this as well, and that you must have a ventilation system that is filtered, that's completely controlled and filtered. So if you're missing that piece of the puzzle, I don't think we're doing our biosecurity practices any justice, and we're just wasting money on, added, biosecurity practices. So in a filtered poultry environment, the goal is pretty simple. All the air you bring in must come through a filter, whether it's exhaust, negatively pressured or positively pressured. That is the goal, is to bring all the incoming air, through a filter. And, there's challenges, and there's definitely key points that you have to take in consideration of what makes a properly filtered a barn. And the first thing we have to look at is, how tight is the building? Entire building must be, sealed extremely well, because, you can have, in a perfect world, you're never going to have a fully complete 100% sealed building, but any cracks, gaps, poorly sealed access points become a unfiltered air path. So we have to look at the building of what we're doing, particularly if it's a retrofit of like, okay, well, where are our weak points in this building? Where could we possibly bring in, leaked air, to make sure, we don't expose our birds, it's got to come through the filters. Like that's it. Then also too, you got to have dedicated air inlets with high efficiency, filters. So again, all incoming air has to pass through a certified filtration system. Typically, we're seeing anywhere from a MERV 13 to a MERV 16, depending on the farm's risk factor. And these filters trap the virus carrying dust, dander, material. But the inlets and the air plenums and the distribution hoods also have to be sized correctly so that the fans can pull in the correct air. So that brings another challenge to your ventilation system, and that is that you got to have properly designed fans that will accommodate higher stack pressures. So I kind of look at filters as, kind of the way that we even size, let's say, cool cell pads. Like with AAF filters that Rob sells, we know exactly off of speed curves of how much CFM cubic feet of minute airspeed I can bring through that filter. So we size the barns and we know exactly how many filters we need based off of the airflow requirements that is required of this poultry facility. So making sure that you have fans that are Best Labs tested, AMCA certified tested, and make sure that they can stand, static pressures of at least a 0.20 inches of water column is very important. So if you have very low airflow efficiency, airflow ratio fans, and you try to add filters, well, you could really cause harm to your airflow into the birds and the environment due to the fans not being able to hold to capacity of the stack pressure of the filters. So making sure you have high efficiency fans is very key and very important to this.
It sounds fairly complicated, and there's a lot of things that need to work together. J&D has formed this unique partnership with AAF to add filtration to the ventilation system. So can you talk about the strengths of your respective companies and how you work together to get that right combination of ventilation and filtration to keep the flocks healthy?
Yeah, so I think the combination is J&D. We're a very analytical company. We're very transparent with our data of fan performance. And AAF is the same with their filter performance. To me, the partnership that me and Rob, decided to make here is with J&D's expertise of airflow design, and then AAF's high performance of filters, we're able to create the perfect environment for the birds. And that's what it's all about. And we want to deliver without, having any consequence of, the environment that the birds are in. So you're still getting the perfect airflow that you need for these birds, but then you're also protecting them as well from avian flu. And what we're trying to create is a risk management system, for our industry.
The synergy between J&D and AAF has been very, very good. We're able to piggyback off each other. Obviously, J&D and their expertise in the fans and what is needed and required in the ventilation, and us here at AAF, global leader in filtration. We're the leader in filtration in the swine industry here in the United States, and so we've got a lot of knowledge and expertise as well that, combined with J&D, gives us the full package that we can bring that to our customers and these integrators to sit down with them, have those conversations, and come up with the best plan for their barn designs.
Save the date. Join the Poultry Science Association for the 2026 PSA annual meeting happening July 10th to 13th, 2026. Experience the forefront of poultry science at this dynamic conference featuring cutting-edge research and innovation from industry leaders and academic experts. It's your opportunity to connect, learn, and help shape the future of poultry science. Mark your calendar and stay tuned for more at poultryscience.org.
If you're enjoying this episode of the Poultry Podcast Show presented by Wisenetics, please remember to like, subscribe, and share it with your friends and family. You can also set the notifications to on from our channel so you don't miss any other upcoming episodes. And please always feel free to leave us your comments if you have any. Your feedback is invaluable to us. So the challenge for farmers is often justifying the added expense of these advanced ventilation systems. What should they know about the economic implications?
Well, to me, I think the economic justification is pretty straightforward. I mean, a single disease outbreak can cost a farm more than what, to me, these systems, require in costs. Between mortality, lost production, your downtime, the cost of cleaning and sterilization, and then repopulating. An outbreak can set a farm back, hundreds of thousands, if not, possibly millions of dollars. So I think when you compare the cost of adding a filtration system or upgrading your ventilation system to be filtered, I think the math adds up pretty quick.
And filtration, it's a long-term solution. This isn't something we're going to snap our fingers and one and done, or, filters last years, on average 4 to 6 years, typically that we see. And it's also a solution that does not physically impact the birds that we're dealing with from either like an antibiotic standpoint or even a vaccine standpoint, which, can be a challenge as well when we're looking at meat exports and egg exports. Other countries view antibiotic use and vaccine use a lot of times from a negative aspect. And so filtration can avoid those uses and still protect those birds from that disease.
Rob, you mentioned there was a lot more information available for swine, but is that information coming in the poultry industry, or is it building up? And do the producers can they have more confidence in the direct application to poultry as well?
Yeah, like I said before, it's something that we can easily transfer over to the poultry side. But like I mentioned before, we're very close with the University of Minnesota, and we're looking at some other universities to work very closely from the poultry side of things to do some case studies and some internal studies just to gather and have that data, that proof, and those whys of why use air filtration, just to help back the reasoning behind that.
Well, we're heading into the spring migration season, and poultry farmers around the world will be faced with the implications or the potential implications of avian influenza. If producers are interested in investing in these types of systems that we've been discussing today, how long would it take, and how do farmers start in the process?
Well, to me, to start the process, I think you just have to weigh your risk management. Again, it comes down to, well, what impact did avian flu actually have on your farm in 2024? Or honestly, let's look back in the past 4 years. So, I think you have to weigh that option first. What type of, risk are you at? In the process, obviously it does take a lot of planning, particularly if it's a retrofit, barn application. Not everybody's going to want to just tear down their barn and start over, right? So, if it's a retro style, to converting your barn into filters, it definitely takes time and planning, for sure. So us as a ventilation company, we need to come out there, check out the barn, see what we're limited to or not limited to. So it definitely takes some time and planning for sure. So, the time to start is now. I don't see avian flu ever going away. And, I think this is going to be a yearly and not just during the cold months. We've obviously seen it, spikes happening even during the summertime. So avian flu is here to stay. It just is, and it's not going to go away.
Exactly. And I would add, kind of piggyback off what Kellen said, having, if at all, the thought is, hey, do I want to add air filtration to my system? Involving us in those very beginning discussions, either we can visit the farm, we can jump on some calls or some teams. I mean, just having those discussions, because what I think, and Kellen would probably agree with me, what we've seen in the past when talking with integrators is, I think there's still been a lot of unknown when it comes to air filtration. And so the more we can sit down, talk about, discuss, explain what that really entails, makes a huge difference. And when those integrators start understanding what it means to be filtered, I think they get a much greater respect for it and understand the true value of adding that aspect to their farms.
So it's a worthwhile investment.
It's time for our famous three.
Evonik Animal Nutrition is committed to ensure food security and safety while reducing the ecological footprint of animal farming. Its products and services use evidence-based solutions that seek to promote animal welfare and reduce reliance on natural resources. All this is underpinned by long-standing industry partnerships and deep customer understanding. Evonik's focus on efficiency, sustainable, healthy nutrition, and collaborations with livestock farming partners creates value for customers and consumers.
Well, Rob and Kellen, thanks for your time with us today. Before we let you go, there's a few questions that we always like to ask our guests. So maybe I'll start with Rob. What's your favorite poultry or agriculture or maybe even ventilation related book or resource?
Probably the Poultry School. That's one area that AAF actually sponsors. And there is a ton of great information, webinar-based type of platform that can teach you a lot about poultry production and really gives the producers and people a lot of good information to help educate them.
Okay. Kellen, same question.
So we sponsor through Watt Media, and Watt Media does a great job of, utilizing resources and, bringing industry leaders on, all new technology. And I would highly recommend, Watt Media Group, for the poultry side.
Okay, thanks. Rob, what about outside of agriculture? Maybe what do you like to do in your spare time?
Spare time, I'm a big hunter and fisherman. And actually, it's kind of funny of that we're talking about HPAI, because I had an experience here just a few years ago. I'm from South Dakota, and we were out hunting, and I was driving down the highway, and at first it was late November, so obviously the fall migration was occurring. And as we're driving down the highway, at first glance, I said, well, who let all these white trash bags just float around and lay out in the fields? And once I kind of looked a little closer, they were actually dead snow geese out in fields all over the place. And as we saw some of the flocks flying, as they got up, some birds would get up, others would stick behind because they were too sick to fly. And so that was really personally one of the first times I physically saw the impact of HPAI on the wild bird population. And I think we all know Mother Nature is a pretty cruel thing when it comes to wildlife. And so it was a little tough to see that. And so it just gave me a different perspective and importance of why it's so important for us to protect our flocks, because HPAI is not nice. It is very devastating, mentally and economically. And so it definitely resonated an importance to me.
Kellen, how about you?
Really, outside of work, I mean, my time that I like to do is I'm pretty big into music, so play lots of music, several different instruments and stuff like that. And I live in Athens, Georgia, so it's a pretty big music town. So do lots of music related stuff, a bunch of musicians and stuff like that. So not a lot of impact there from HPAI, so like Rob's story, but that's what I like to do on my spare time.
All right, last question. Rob, in your opinion, what do you think is the most important characteristic for a person to have in order to be successful in your industry?
I think you have to have an initiative to always push, always looking to improve. For our position, the main focus is to protect our food supply, right? That's the main goal. And so whatever we can do to help sustain that, we're always looking for ways to do things. What will improve it? What will impact it? Just like our filtration work with the J&D and then trying to improve on these poultry barns. It's like that is a way to protect our future food supply.
And how about you, Kellen?
I think to me, like integrity of, is a huge thing, always, staying behind, what you do in the industry. For us, it's, being a ventilation company. So, we're always trying to push the envelope of our ventilation design to better perform to help our flocks better perform, help reduce energy costs. And now, we're being a forefront leader of, filter barns for the poultry industry. So continuously pushing and having integrity to stand behind the product and what we do and make it better every day. To me, I think that's, a big characteristic.
Well, Rob Langenhorst and Kellen Harris, thanks so much for taking the time to join us today on the Poultry Podcast Show.
Thanks for having us, Doug.
Thanks for having us.
That concludes another episode of the Poultry Podcast Show presented by Wisenetics. Thanks for joining us today. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast so you can stay tuned for updates on future episodes. If you enjoyed today's episode, please leave us a review. Your feedback is important to us. You can visit our website at wisenetics.com and learn more all about our podcast segments for poultry, swine, dairy, beef, feed mill, crops, and even pet food. I'm Doug Corver, and I'll see you next time on the Poultry Podcast Show.